here we are this afternoon. We're very excited because we've worked hard. We've been at a high level of energy, and now we can bring it down and float in a beautiful space of spiritual contemplation. Because our guest is a spiritual leader, PhD, author, and social activist who is the author of a book that you can see behind us if you are on YouTube with us. It's Hollywood to the Himalayas, a journey of healing and transformation. And if I pronounce her name right, I get a prize. Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati.
Perfect.
Ooh,
absolutely perfect.
Well, Sadhvi, welcome so much to our show. And thank you so much for matching our environment so beautifully in many ways.
It's such an honor to be here. I'm so touched, Kim, to be here with you and the entire team and family here at the Global Wellness Summit.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it a fitting place, Tel Aviv and in the Middle East, to really talk about spirituality?
It's the Holy Land. And regardless of what your religious background may be, there's an energy.
There really is.
And when you've got a place that so many people for so long have worshipped as holy. You know, in Rishikesh, India, where I live, on the banks of the sacred Ganga River, the Ganges River, in the lap of the Himalayas, it's a place people always ask, you know, isn't God everywhere? Can't I experience awakening everywhere? Why Rishikesh? And yes, obviously, God is everywhere. Grace is everywhere. Accessible everywhere. Attainable everywhere. And yet, there's an energy that is so powerful that it aligns so beautifully with our energy. And it just makes that attainment somewhat more present, somewhat easier, somewhat...
to access.
Somewhat more accessible, exactly. So coming from one very deep holy land in the Himalayas to this holy land, you really feel it. And yes, it's a perfect place to talk about spirituality.
You know, it's funny. My husband and I, the listeners will know this, set aside, made it a big deal for our 25th anniversary that we just celebrated to do a 10-day Holy Land tour before we got here to this conference. And he's gone home, but it was so emotional. There were so many things. And I laughed so hard because a girlfriend who'd been on the tour before me said, you know what, Kim, if you were raised with the Bible or a faith, and this is your first time here as an adult, you're going to go home and be mad at your mother because she's never taken you here before. And that's how I felt, especially Jerusalem. There is such talk about energy, you know, and the Mecca, like how everyone is there, every faith. It's like a mosaic. But back to your message and journey. You spoke our first night together here in Tel Aviv for the Global Wellness Summit. You spoke yesterday. And one thing that our the founder of the summit, the Institute, Susie Ellis, said is that we were chastised in Singapore by a wonderful faith leader and thought leader in the faith movement, Martin Palmer, for not focusing on spirituality more, because mind-body wellness is as important as physical wellness.
Absolutely.
So tell us why you think spirituality deserves its fair share of conversation.
Well, it's so critical to our lives that, you know, it always depends what your goal is. If your goal in life is simply to make a lot of money, then who am I to say you must also be spiritual?
Right.
Who am I to say you must also focus on that? I'm not the spiritual police. If your goal in life is only to attain a level of economic success or career success, and you have no interest in pursuing anything else, okay, that's absolutely your prerogative. We have free will. We are each in charge of our own karmic journey. But if you are looking for something that is wellness, well, then you can't leave it out. It's like, it would be like saying, so I want to be really healthy and I want to do everything that's really good for my body as long as it doesn't involve my liver.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? Like, just don't talk to me about my liver, but otherwise I want to do everything that's good for me. Well, anybody who knows anything about physical health would say, your liver is kind of important because it's really the place in which all of the toxins are getting worked through and purified. And it's going to be the place in which, if it's not functioning well, no matter what else you're doing, you're going to suffer physically. And in the same way, when you think about our full experience of wellness or a fuller experience of health, as I mentioned yesterday, the root of the word health, hal, from the Old English, is actually the same root as wholeness. And even in some etymologies of holiness, meaning that it's a package deal. You've got to be more than just physically healthy in order to have hal. You have to have an experience of wholeness. And only spirituality can give us that. Because spirituality is that which shows us we are one. We are connected. We're not just the body. We are spirit. We are soul. We are love. We are consciousness. We are not separate. We're connected.
And I find it fascinating to think about the fact that humans are hardwired for spirituality and if they worship something. So if it isn't a higher purpose or a higher being or, faith, then often it's money, often it's other people, often it's possession. So I also love hearing here how everything agrees. It's in parallel. Like we heard Dan Buettner from Blue Zones. I don't know if you heard him today speak. But one thing, it's data on cultures that live the longest. And one of the habits of these cultures is saying grace before a meal. And I was like, well, geez, that makes me happy.
That's great. I didn't know that. That's wonderful. But it makes perfect sense because, all of the things that you were just saying, if we're not spiritual, but that we connect to, whether it's money, as you say, or more possessions. The reason is that the core of who we are is expansive. The core of who we are is soul, is spirit, is consciousness, is infinite. It's not just this body. We have a body, but we're not the body. That's, for me, really the bottom line teaching that I learned in India 26 years ago, that Hollywood to the Himalayas arc journey, was from this idea that you are your body. Therefore, you're limited by the size, the shape, the color, the story, the history, the personality. And therefore, you suffer. To the Himalayan way of thinking, which says you have a body, but you're not the body. And I mention that here because when we don't have a connection spiritually to that within us, which is expansive, whether you say soul, whether you say spirit, whether you say divinity, whether you say consciousness, whether you say love, doesn't matter what word we use. If I don't have a connection to that, which is the truth of who I am, I'm going to look for other ways to expand. Because my nature is expansive, and we always want to go back to that nature, to that truth. So if I'm not expanding spiritually, I'm going to look to do it through getting a lot of money, buying a lot of possessions, eating a lot of food, having a lot of relationships, because they're all going to be things that in a very misguided way, are going to make me feel like I have expanded. Like, look, now I own all these things. Now I've got all this money. But that's not actually the real expansion. All that ends up doing is actually making you more and more claustrophobic, because then all you're doing is suffocating yourself underneath the roles, underneath the possessions, underneath the yearnings. And that's why our spiritual teachers of every religion have always sent us back inside, back to that expansive core, expansive source of ourself, that true self.
So you found your way to that journey, but let's talk about that for our listeners. Hollywood could really be thought of as one of the least spiritual places in many ways. So you started out there. Were you in Hebrew school? What neighborhood were you born in?
No, I grew up quite literally in Hollywood, in Studio City.
Oh,
Up the hill from Universal Studios in what's called the Hollywood Hills.
I know that.
And I spent my entire youth there until I graduated high school and went off to Stanford for university. And I lived a life that was full of great privilege, great opportunity, great blessings. Mm-hmm. I had the Hollywood life in many ways, where if you looked at me, you would have said, she's got everything.
Yeah.
I then went to Stanford, graduated from Stanford, was then in the midst of getting my PhD in psychology. And I was 25 at that point. And if you had looked at me from the outside, you would have said even more, this girl's got everything. Mm-hmm. And yet, I wasn't deeply happy. I wasn't deeply in peace. I was experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of depression, a lot of tension. Some of it, of course, was just the world of academia. Exactly.
Right.
And some of it was just run of the mill, like, here's what it's like to be a highly efficient, effective,
adult.
Perfectionist. But on a personal level, I had also experienced a lot of challenges and suffering and trauma even in early childhood. Mm. And I carried that with me into adolescence and into my early 20s. I suffered from severe bulimia. I suffered from depression. I was really struggling. And by the time I was 25, and of course I was managing to get straight A's at Stanford in the meantime.
Wow.
Continue on in a way where on the outside everything looked perfect. By the time I was 25, I had gotten to a place where I was managing. I was managing my emotions. I was managing my anger. I was managing my pain. I was managing my eating. I was managing my relationships. I was managing everything. And I really thought that that was the best that we got. I mean, everybody I knew was just managing their lives. Some were managing it better than others. But it never occurred to me that there was anything better than that. Nobody ever said to me, by the way, you can actually be free. Simply managing this stuff is not actually the highest goal. So I went off to India with a backpack on a semester off of my PhD program.
Well, you just thought it'd be a good idea to chill? Is that why?
No, actually, I was an avid traveler. I had traveled a lot in Europe, in England, across the US. I had spent a year in South America. I was always an avid traveler. I had been continually in my PhD program without any break for many, many semesters. And I knew it was time for a travel break. My husband, I was married at the time. I had gotten married right out of undergraduate.
Oh, let's just add marriage to the mix.
Well, it's in the book. It's in the book. It's right there from the very beginning. But yeah, there was a lot going on in my life at that time. And my husband very much wanted to come to India. I knew nothing about India other than that I loved Indian food.
Yeah.
I was a strict vegetarian since I was 15 and knew that Indian food was easy, healthy. You don't have to ask twice about chicken broth or eggs or fish or things like that. And really to keep my husband happy, I said yes to India and came with a backpack. And Rishikesh was the very first place we went. I opened a Lonely Planet guidebook in Delhi.
They're so good.
It was fantastic. And it was 1996, so there was no Google at that time. And sat in Delhi and opened up the guidebook and said, Rishikesh. Fast forward, it's a long, beautiful story, but fast forward to after I had had an extraordinary experience standing on the banks of the Ganga, the Ganges River. Very first time I had gone down. I didn't even know the river was holy. And I walked down, and suddenly, as I'm standing there, I had this extraordinary experience, like a veil was pulled off of my eyes. And I could see. And I could see an experience with every bit of knowing that I had. The presence of the divine as not separate from me, as everywhere in everything and in myself. And I had always lived with this sense of something's wrong with me. I wasn't, I was fantastically succeeding on the outside world, but as you know, that doesn't necessarily change how we feel on the inside world. We keep succeeding outside to hopefully make ourselves feel okay on the inside, but it doesn't actually work. And I had always felt like I wasn't quite good enough. I wasn't pure enough. I wasn't right enough on very, very deep levels. As I mentioned in early childhood, I had experienced trauma. I had been abused in my early childhood.
Sorry.
And so it had led to this pervasive sense of something not right about me, something not enough about me. And suddenly I had this experience of the presence of the divine in me, around me, as everything. And it knocked me to the ground in tears.
Something you can't ignore.
No, absolutely can't ignore, don't want to ignore. It was the most extraordinary experience of my life. It was literally like a veil over every single way of knowing that I had had. Knowing myself, knowing the universe, knowing my place in the universe, that veil was pulled off. And then about a week later, and I'm, in the interest of time, fast forwarding through a lot of the really magical, mystical, amazing moments of that first week when the universe just clearly kept sending me exactly where I needed to be, to the ashram I needed to be to, and to the spiritual leader from whom I was to learn. And when I finally met him about a week after I had had this experience, I shared with him what I had been through. I shared with him my fears, my anger, my difficulties, and he sent me into the river to let it all go. To stand in that river and to let it go. And yeah, I'm talking about childhood abuse. I was talking about a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of trauma. And it was the most extraordinary thing. I did not think it was going to work. I mean, I was a Western academic. I was a
skeptic.
PhD.
Yes.
A skeptic. I wouldn't say skeptic so much as really indoctrinated academic. So I always had an open heart, but there was, as you know, there's this sense in academia, and perhaps especially Western academia, I don't know, of we know everything. And here I was getting a PhD in psychology. And to me, this was how one dealt with pain.
Yeah, psychologist.
Suffer. Exactly. You go through therapy, you go through psychology, you go through a process. You don't give it to a river.
That would seem a little odd in a classroom.
And yet, that was the instruction I was given. And it ended up being this turning point for me, this incredible turning point from pain, anger, suffering, and identification as the one who had been abused, the one who had been abandoned, the one who had an eating disorder, the one who was depressed, the one who struggled. That all of that identity was able to be washed away. And that's the thing, Kim, is we hold on to these identities. And that keeps us really stuck. It keeps us living in this state of dis-ease. If I've got an identity that says, right, I am angry, or I am depressed, or I am a workaholic.
Or I'm unworthy.
I am unworthy. That's my story.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me, Sadhvi, like this journey that brought you to the river had a wider purpose. I mean, your book outlines your vows of celibacy. I don't know what the word renunciation means. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Did I say it right?
Yes.
You're a renunciate. What does that mean? You leave the past behind?
It's it's a renunciation of a lot. We take very specific vows, one being celibacy, of course, but they're vows of simplicity, vows of non-attachment, vows of dedicating your life every minute to the divine. And whether that's in personal practice, whether that's in service, whether it's specific service, the type that we do of education, children, women, girls, the environment, healthcare, water, or whether it's spiritual service.
So how do you define, because really when you read your bio, Sadhvi, I don't know how you take your message to a higher plane than the United Nations Advisory Council on Religion and steering committees for sustainable development and a moral imperative to end extreme poverty by the World Bank. It's almost like being a recluse linked to reality, because reality kind of gets it done. To the point where, was it last year that President Biden gave you a Lifetime Achievement Award? You can't live in the woods for that to happen. Someone has to find you. So how do you balance that out?
Beautiful. So first of all, I'm going to take just very friendly and fun objection to what we consider reality. We've got the inner world and we've got the outer world. And that which we practice on the inner world, our meditation, our yoga, that experience of oneness, well, it's not supposed to end on your cushion or on your yoga mat. It's supposed to manifest through you into the world. Look at the Buddha, for example. After he got enlightened,
he got around.
right? I mean, how easy would it have been for him to just say, now I'm done, and just keep sitting under the Bodhi tree? But he didn't. He stood up and he walked back to serve, to teach, to help. And if you look at prophets, teachers, leaders, masters of all of the different religions, what you find is when they have that really deep internal experience, it sends them back into the outer world to serve. So our internal practice is critical. It's that which shows us who we are. Because if we don't know who we are, we don't know what to do. Every other species on earth knows exactly what to do, right? Cows are mooing and eating grass and doing their thing. Dogs are barking, eating something else, doing their thing. They all know what to do. Humans are the only species that, interestingly, has no idea what to eat, when to eat it, when to sleep, what to do. Constantly looking for what to do. Well, the what to do only arises when I know who I am. So we need the internal practice because we need to know who I am so that I can then know what to do. But then beyond knowing who I am, beyond that internal connection, that manifests through us. We stand from the meditation, from the yoga, from an experience of being one with the creator, with the divine, with the universe, into then engaged action. So yes, whether it's with the United Nations or the World Bank or all of
the International Day of Yoga.
Exactly. All of the different platforms I've been so blessed and privileged to be able to serve in. We serve from that place of meditation in action.
That is, I think, something to hang our hat on. I wish we could talk longer with you, Sadhvi. We have so many wonderful people to catch before they leave the summit. So we're going to end here, but we're also going to ask people to look to your sites. Where could they find more of your...
So they can find me online at Sadhviji. It's SADHVIJI. JI is the Indian term of respect. So in India, they say Sadhviji. People sometimes think it's Sadhviji, like Kenny G. And I say, no, it's not. It's JI. So it's SADHVIJI. Sadhviji.org is my website. On YouTube and Instagram, it's Sadhviji. On Facebook, it's my full name, Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati. And if people want to know more, I would love people to get a copy of Hollywood to the Himalayas.
Yeah, because I live in Hollywood, and let me tell you, it's a long way between the two. So if they want to find out more, we know where we'll send them. We'll put it in the show notes.
Wonderful, thank you.
And we're gonna post your beautiful picture and make people feel warm from your colors and warmth. So
and
thank you.
Lastly, just to let you and all of your listeners know that should anyone feel inspired, called to want to come and spend any amount of time on the banks of the sacred Ganges, in the lap of the Himalayas, they are more than welcome to. I live at a place called Parmarth Niketan. They'll find it online through my sites.
Yeah.
We've got almost 1,000 rooms. Come and stay with us. It's glorious. We host the annual International Yoga Festival every year in March. We'd love to welcome people home. So until you can get there, make that shift in your mindset from Hollywood to the Himalayas, but do try to get there and spend some time with us. You will really, really love it. And Kim, I'd love to have you and your whole team come and spend time with us.
Well, be careful what you wish for, Sadhvi. So thank you so much.
It's a good wish.